The universe is loud in a very quiet way. Are you listening? Welcome to the Cosmic Whispers podcast, where we delve into the realms of spirituality, personal growth, and the cosmic dance between the third and fifth dimensions. In a world filled with noise and distractions, we invite you to tune in to your own cosmic whispers, where we can awaken our inner wisdom and embark on unveiling the authentic self and cosmic connection. Please note that the content provided here is not intended as medical advice. It is essential to consult your healthcare professional for any medical inquiries. Welcome to episode 6. Today's special guest is Matt Toussaint, program director and lead facilitator of Casa Del Maestro, a family-operated jungle-to-table ayahuasca center based in Peru. A native of Upstate New York with a background in cultural anthropology, Matt's innate connection to nature has always been profound. His initial ayahuasca experience in 2008 with esteemed curandero Maestro Alberto Torres Davila marked a pivotal shift in his life's trajectory. Matt's affinity for plant-based wisdom deepened, propelling him to eventually make Peru his home. From nurturing transformative journeys within private groups across 3 retreat centers to guiding personal one-on-one explorations, Matt's dedication to the healing potential of plant medicine has left an indelible impact. In 2021, he partnered with Maestro Alberto and the team at Casa Del Maestro. Together, they continue to weave ancient traditions, shaping profound healing experiences for all who seek them. Welcome, Matt. Really happy to have you here.
Thank you, Joan. It's great to be here.
Before we start, I'm going to pull a card.
Okay.
See what the guides have for us. Interesting. So we got 2. One is make time for self-love, and the other is take inspired action. Is that relevant?
That's exactly what the plants I work with were telling me to do this week. I had kind of come up to a puzzle in my personal life, and that's exactly what they said. That's great.
The cards are always on point. That's why I love to pull right when we start.
Yeah, that's great. What deck is that?
This is called Moonology Manifestation Oracle Cards.
Nice.
Yeah, it's a great deck. I love it. So I would actually love to hear about your background and how you got started in all of this.
Sure. It goes back to early in my life. As you mentioned, I'm born in upstate New York. You know, through my teens, into my late teens, I wasn't really interested in anything to do with spirituality or shamanism or really anything related to the unseen world. It kind of came into my life seemingly out of nowhere. Growing up, I was mostly interested in really 2 things. I really liked playing sports, particularly American football and baseball, and I got into martial arts a little bit later in my teens as well. And I really just liked being outside. And so a lot of my early work experiences was like in landscaping. I worked for the DC, the Department of Environmental Conservation, for a while. I did land surveying. And those are really 2 things that I was passionate about. At some point, a group of friends and I started to explore psychedelics. And I was probably 17, 18, 19, kind of that time period. And the intention there was really to just see how far we could go. Like I said, we just wanted to see how far we could push it. We wanted to see, what we could discover within our own minds, but there really was nothing spiritual about it. And one particular night, it was like mid-September 2001, very critical time. I guess what you would describe now, or what I would describe to myself now, as a kind of spiritual awakening. I took large doses of LSD, and we had done this before. And I had entered that realm, and it didn't really affect me in a way that left lasting change, that altered sort of the fundamental way that I looked at reality. But this one experience did all of that in one shot, and it was like a complete 180 for me. I went from having no interest, no belief. It's not that I didn't believe. I was an unnamed agnostic, you could say. It's that it just wasn't important to me. Spirituality, religion, anything like that. And on that night, I awakened to the power of the mystery. And by the next day, I was starting to see things that would happen before they happened. I could read people's energy. I was seeing spirits. I was having spirits visit me in my dreams. I would see them walking around people's houses. And it was astonishing to me, but more profound than that was the orientation, the way that it changed how I viewed the world, how I viewed people, how I viewed sort of what the foundational reality was. And there was just so much behind it that I hadn't been looking at, I hadn't been drawn to. And so that really launched me into an exploration of as much as I could related to mystery traditions. And that kind of led to my interest in particularly cultural anthropology, which then kind of brought me into shamanism. Even though during that exploration, it was still in a way academic. I was very interested for many different reasons, but I wasn't necessarily interested in practicing that in any way that wasn't like a personal spiritual path. I had no inclination to kind of do this as work or as my livelihood. But I did want to study it. And so that's why I went to university several years after that. And I had developed a meditation practice. What was really interesting about that experience is that I received messages there that told me that, like when I was in that altered state inside the LSD, they told me that that's where I was going to work. And I had no idea what that meant. And it was a little bit confusing. My initial interpretation was, okay, this has something to do with LSD. And that put me on a path to explore sort of the history of that substance and the biochemistry of it and how it worked. And I got really deep into Stan Grof's work. And my impulse was to go study psychology and kind of understand more about how psychedelics, and particularly LSD, was utilized in these healing contexts, in these transformative contexts. But then at some point, what happened was I took LSD again and almost nothing happened. And like when I say large doses, we're talking like large doses, more than 10 of really strong, powerful LSD.
Wait, that's insane.
It's insane.
That's like double a hero's dose.
Yeah,
Wow.
it
Okay.
is.
If we can backtrack a little bit, I'm just curious, how did that come through as messages? Like, was it visual? Was it just a knowing?
Okay, it's a good question.
That's a pretty big message to be getting,
Yeah.
that you're going to be working with a medicine.
Yeah. And, like for me, there was no place to put it. There was no context. There was nothing to hold what that was supposed to mean or what I was supposed to do with it or where I was supposed to go with that. I was completely out of my depth, and it was also completely out of character. And it didn't totally resonate with the friends and the people that I was with either. So in the vision, what happened is I was going through a kind of sequential overview of my entire life, and particularly all of my close family relationships and other relationships that were important and things that had really deep meaning to me and painful experiences and difficulties, successes, defeats, everything that was important in some way, the good, the bad, the weird, the messy. After I got to the end of that sequence, I visually ascended into a realm that the most accurate description would be like a heavenly realm.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it was classic kind of Christian mythology symbolized in this space. And so I'm talking the billowy clouds, the white kind of blue tinted shiny lights, angelic voices. I didn't see figures, but there were these kind of amorphous shapes, and it was very clear to me. It's like, okay, I'm in heaven, so I'm either dead or I'm in trouble. But I was hearing this singing, and it was enchanting. It was mesmerizing. It was hauntingly beautiful, and it was like complete bliss. I'd never experienced anything like that. And the singing evolved into this booming voice. And I know it's getting cliche, but this is what happened. And I hear this voice in the distance calling my name. And it was saying, you. It was like the sky opened in the voice of God. I don't know if that's what it was.
That's wild.
It was wild. And finally I'm like, what?
Like, screw it. I'm just going to talk back. I got to figure this out.
Yeah. Mind you, I'm 17 years old. It's like 4 a.m. I'm sitting on the front stoops of my friend's parents' house we had the house to ourselves that weekend. So this was like our, weekend of psychic exploration. And like, these are my boys. These were my best friends in the world. And one of them is sitting with me, kind of being the chaperone. So I didn't do anything crazy because I was gone. There was no contact with the physical world at this point. So the booming voice, I answered, and it said to me, "This is where you're gonna work." And I'm like, what? And then the reverse happened. I got spit out of that realm, and I kind of went backwards through my whole life to the moment that I was then experiencing, and the sun was rising. So it was an all-nighter, and I didn't have words for a couple of hours. We kind of regathered, and we ended up going to a diner for breakfast. And that's when I started to, like, for instance, I saw a group of these people who were going golfing, and they all had the same shirts on. And I knew what they were going to order. Wow. And I was watching them make the order. I mean, they're across the restaurant. I can't hear them, but I was like, okay, that guy's going for the omelet. That's pancakes and bacon and a large glass of orange juice. And I kind of chalked it up to, okay, I'm just tripping. I didn't quite know how to situate any of that.
You just became psychic overnight.
It was like that. Now it kind of came and went. It wasn't that heightened all the time, but that set of sensibilities has never left me, and I've learned how to work with it throughout my life, and also understand it and completely normalize it, and also see the sensitivities in other people, and how that means of communication, I believe, is very natural. It's organic. It's how humans, it's a manner that human beings inherit, and that's how we communicate. And I think a lot of people are just out of touch with that, or they're in touch with it, but they don't have the right kind of language or a functional way to explain what's happening. And, a lot of it gets chalked up to intuition and things like that. But I believe that these channels of communication are very much alive in people. And that's what we use in our work now to kind of transmit and express the types of energies that need to be expressed in order to guide people through the experiences. Mm-hmm. So after that day, I mean, it was a complete 180 in my life. And then this became the most meaningful thing to me. I wanted to get to the bottom of this. I wanted to understand that experience as much as I could, and ended up studying anthropology, became more interested in different kinds of what you could call spirit-based practices around the world. And, I also went into, my own cultural heritage and looked at sort of the Christian mythology and the kind of mystical backdrop to some of that. About 5-6 years later, I was doing a meditation, and I had started a meditation practice because after I took psychedelics again and not much happened, I realized that it wasn't about the substance. I was like, there's actually something more fundamental. And that made me more interested in altered states of consciousness that were actually not induced by substances. Yep. So meditation and different ways of kind of expanding or shifting consciousness became like the more prominent spiritual practice for me, and just personal exploration for me. And there was several years where I went completely sober. I didn't ingest anything. I didn't ingest psychedelic, not even alcohol. I was basically off the wagon for all of it. And I was getting a lot out of that kind of exploration. During one of the meditations, I think we're in 2007 now, I had a vision where spirits came to me and they told me very clearly and there was very clear sensation of presences, and there were three distinct ones. This was not visual. This was auditory. And they said, go to Peru, find a shaman, drink ayahuasca. I had heard about ayahuasca because I was exploring all different kinds of psychedelics and things like that. So I did it. I had no idea that you could do that there were organized ways to do that at that time. The ayahuasca culture was nothing like what it is now back then. It's gone through a major evolution since that time. And what really got me to go to the place that I ended up going to was Maestro Don Alberto's picture. There was just something about his face and whatever was being transmitted or expressed in that photo just made me feel like, okay, that's the guy I want to go see. And then my very first ayahuasca ceremony, this was 6 months after I made the decision to go. The first ceremony, like the first visionary sequence, I went in. Mind you, I had no idea why I was going there. I just was listening to the guidance. And I was even a bit skeptical at that time. After everything that I'd been through, I still wasn't 100% sure about what the reason behind it all was. But in that ceremony, I went through a very similar sequence and ended up in that same space, that same heavenly kind of realm. And then that voice came back and it said, see, this is where you're going to work. Wow. And then the vision descended and I came back into the physical world. And on the other end of a tunnel of light were the maestros who were leading that ceremony and said, and I hear another voice and say, those are your teachers. And that's how I got into working with ayahuasca. Even though I didn't believe the vision, I didn't accept it. I didn't tell anyone for over 4 years, not a single person, about that experience because, to be honest, I didn't really want to be that guy. Like, it's funny because I wasn't, like, I'm not even sure I consider myself a spiritual person now. That wasn't my path. This was not what I was supposed to be doing. This was not in the life plan. And I was a bit embarrassed about it. And so I didn't tell anyone. However, the rest of the week, the medicine just completely ripped me apart and sort of put me back together, left me with a lot of homework. And I had some really serious things that I had to deal with just in terms of what the ayahuasca was showing me and how things that I needed to address in my personal life. So I had a whole host of things that were, prioritized rather than, I'm just going to move to Peru. But that vision never went away. That voice never really went away. And little by little, I started to feel that there was something there. And I would go back to Peru 1 or 2 times a year for the next several years to reconnect with the medicine. And I started to get closer with the medicine, closer with the tradition, a deeper understanding. But the real reason I kept going back is because I kept seeing results when I got home. There were such titanic shifts at levels that I just had no idea even existed. Like, it was real. It was one of the first things that I encountered that was whole in its ability to guide a person from one state to another and have those changes actually become embodied, of course, through the work of the participant in my actual 3D life. And it wasn't so mystical as it was practical. And for me, the medicine was very practical, kind of right from the beginning. And that also was really important to me because I saw that that's where, the meat of this, journey that people are on to make change in their life and to, embody the best that they can be. It has to be practical. It can't just be visionary. And my life was starting to prove that was how ayahuasca worked. And it just made a lot of sense to me. And then 6 years after that, so now we're up to like 2014, the people who were running the place where Maestro Alberto was working invited me to come work. And that's when I started as an assistant to learn the medicine. And technically I was invited. And at this time I was now also, vocal about the calling that I had. And, it's like, I want to learn. I don't want to just kind of help out with the ceremonies. I actually want to learn how to practice this medicine. And so over the 6 years, I developed relationships with the spirits and the cosmology and the practice of working with that kind of energy in the plants, not necessarily consuming them because I wasn't in Peru, but I learned how to work with the energies that they left you with. And they accepted. I started working in ceremony at that point. That was 2014.
What's entailed in learning to work with the medicines?
Yeah, that's a good question. My experience was, especially with Maestro Alberto, was to figure it out.
Okay.
It was drink the medicine, do diets, communicate with the spirits, and receive from them. Now, there are a lot of technicalities that I learned and that, other mentors and teachers that I've had along the way had shown me, but the understanding that I have now.
The medicine is the teacher.
Correct. The medicine is the teacher. The maestro is the guide. At least I would say that that's an ideal structure to be in. I've seen other cases where a maestro or a maestra or someone who's representing the medicine can put themselves in the position as the voice of the medicine rather than the medicine itself. But my relationship with Don Alberto hasn't been like that at all. He's very much been there to help broker the relationship. And he, in some ways, just has kind of left me on my own. And I've had to kind of learn how to swim by doing it. It's about 99% on the job training. My view is now, or how I understand it now, is that you have the experience first and then you understand the experience later. And so you learn how to do it before you even know how to describe how to do it. Any other thing that I've learned or had learned before that, it was the exact opposite. Is you gather information and you put it together and then you learn how to do something with that information. This was, you learn how to channel or express a core fundamental principle within that shamanic space. And then as you do it, you start to learn how to describe it afterwards. And the learning too has been very organic and it grows inside of you, funny enough, just like a plant in the real world. So it is a slow process. It is steady. And when the roots are in, and if you think about a plant, like a lot of its initial learning takes place underground. So it's not seen, it's not visible, it's not in language. To a passerby, it doesn't even exist yet. It's underneath the soil, it's in the unconscious. And then little by little by little, you start to establish roots, you get a foundation, and then once you kind of breach the soil and you start to see the light, which can take years even, then understanding starts to come afterwards, and you suddenly have a language set for how to describe these things without having to think about it first. It's just there. It's like the medicine, the seeds of the medicine are literally bearing fruit. They're starting to blossom within you.
Oh, that's beautiful. I love that.
But the primary learning does take from the spirits. And so a lot of it for me has just been begging them to teach me, to show me what to do. I've never had a conversation with Don Alberto about what we're going to do in ceremony that night. Not once. I've known him since 2008. I've been working with him since 2014. Not a single time have we had like a pre-game overview of where we're going to go and what we're going to do. And I've worked with other shamans, and not all shamans work like that. Sometimes there's a lot of discussion and there's a lot of setup and verbalization of what will then be done later on in the ceremony. With him, it's very much we're gonna see what's there, and what's there is going to dictate then what it is that is needed in that moment. It's very spirit first.
That's really being fully present, I think, in the experience.
Right.
Have you ever felt like you need a little grounding when the full moon hits? Perhaps you want to open your third eye a bit before meditation, get your creative juices flowing for a project, or balance some womb healing? Cosmic Mama's ceremonial herbal teas for the chakras can help. Our 100% organic, sustainably sourced, and caffeine-free blends are meticulously handcrafted in small batches. Whether you're looking for an herbal infusion to complement an intentional moment or ceremony, or you just want to enjoy a soothing and delicious brew, Cosmic Mama is here for you. You can support our podcast and enjoy 15% off with code WHISPERS15 on cosmicmama.co. Indulge in the magic of Cosmic Mama ceremonial herbal teas and let their harmonizing essence guide you on your path of connection and well-being. I heard a few words you're using, like maestro and shaman, so I would actually like to go over what is the proper terminology depending on your role during these retreats.
Sure. So, I mean, the word maestro or maestra, if it's feminine, is essentially means teacher. It's for instance, in Spanish-speaking parts of the world, that's also what you would call your school teacher. In other contexts too, like somebody who is, the head mechanic, someone who knows a craft really well can just be called a maestro. The word itself loosely translates to master, but that's not the right connotation. At least this is not my understanding of it. It's more like person of knowledge, person of wisdom. It doesn't have that kind of hierarchical resonance with it, even though in the space, that person or persons, they are leaders of that space. But on the humanistic side, you're not, it's not like you're bowing to them and calling them master. It's not like that. So what it means technically in the ayahuasca world is somebody who has achieved a certain level of expertise and who has gone through a certain kind of training over a period of time that has amassed enough of these spiritual or psychic resources to be able to safely and effectively guide an ayahuasca ceremony. So they are experts at guiding an ayahuasca ceremony. And if they specialize in ayahuasca, they're called ayahuasqueros or ayahuasquera if it's a female. And there's a lot of other plant medicine specialists too that someone could be an expert at and be called a maestro, that have nothing to do with ayahuasca, and in some cases don't have anything to do with plants. Like perfumero is another good example. That's somebody who is skilled in the craft of using perfumes to enact different kinds of states of consciousness or to facilitate healing in some way. And you have tabaqueros, which are people who use tobacco as their main plant. So they're specialists in that plant. Now, when we use the word shaman, that's almost used by convenience because it's become a term, I think, in modern language that covers a lot of different ways that people work with spirit. But it's not technically correct, in my view, to use that term out of context. I don't identify that way. I never would. And I guess never say never, but that's not how I view what it is that we do, even though the definition of a shaman or shamanism would apply in this context. I like to use the local terms. So, that's maestro or ayahuasquero. And then you also have the term curandero, which is generally a term that means healer. So it's somebody who, works in the capacity to evoke healing in other people. And that can be with plants or without plants. Often in the Amazon, it's with plants because that's a primary physical and spiritual resource here in this environment. But in other contexts where they're not necessarily using plants, you can be a curandero and use other types of healing energies.
And so where does the word shaman come from?
Yeah, it's something I looked at and studied a bit in university. It comes from like northern Russia tribal culture, specifically a tribe called the Evenki or the Tungus. I'm probably mispronouncing them, so I mean, no disrespect there. But with the Evenki is they had a word. It was spelled like S-A with an accent M-A-N, and it meant in their language person of knowledge. And it's also been translated as person who knows the spirits. And those practices were principally utilizing drumming and other types of extreme physical states and sensory deprivation, sometimes dancing, other types of musical instruments, a lot of bells. If you've seen pictures of the Evenki shamans, like literally they are the actual original shamans. they are dressed in these fantastic robes with all kinds of different ribbons of cloth and bells, and they kind of move around, and the way they move their body will going to make the bells sound in different ways. And so they would use drums and those kinds of things to evoke these altered states and contact the spirits, get information, bring it back to the tribe, the people, the person, the family, relay that information, and people would then follow what it is that their guardian spirits were telling the shaman. In the 18th century, 19th century, you had these whole series of scholars, and some of them were actually convicts that were sent to these subarctic regions where the indigenous people were living in that part of the world, northern Russia, also a little bit further west into northern Europe. And these people were sent out there because they had committed crimes or they were somehow in trouble with the state. And a lot of them started to document the practices of the tribes, and they in a way went into the indigenous culture and became a at least temporary part of that society. And the early writings about shamanism came from these people, and that's where the word was originally translated into Russian, which was then translated into other European languages, eventually into English. And then around that same time, you had a whole class of cultural anthropologists that were studying the native peoples of the Americas. And they were reading these translated Russian texts, and they realized that a lot of what was being described in terms of the foundational principles of how the tribes in across the other side of the world in the East were working with spirit was very similar. It resonated with what they're observing in the natives of the Americas. And so that's when the term shaman started to get applied to essentially anything that fit that description. And it seems like over time that tendency to apply that word to almost anything that has anything to do with spirit has really just taken off. And so now in modern language, people are just basically calling themselves shamans for a lot of different things. And I don't necessarily see that as wrong, but I do feel that it has diluted the original meaning of what that actually is, because it was very specific to tribe, and every culture that had a spirit-based practice or tradition or lineage, they had their own names for what they called these kinds of people. That being said, there is a lot of commonality in how people work with spirit. So I think that does speak to something more fundamental and more universal. However, the use of the term shaman, I think, is best utilized when it's very clear what it is you mean and in what context. The other thing that happened sort of a little bit later on, I think there's an anthropologist named Mircea Eliade, and he published a text about shamanism, and this was either in the 40s or the 50s when this was published. I could be wrong about that. Sometime in the mid 20th century, and he really universalized it, and that was another turning point in the widespread use of the terminology.
Yeah, I feel like it's evolved into almost like a godlike, what's the word I'm looking for? Just almost like godlike. Ari had mentioned earlier about humanizing the maestro or humanizing the shaman. And I feel like the shaman kind of puts people on a pedestal, is what I'm trying to say.
Or like they're put on a pedestal.
Right.
Yeah, that has definitely happened in the field that I'm in ayahuasca and plant medicine. I don't think that that's the best way to go about it. For instance, if you look at cultures who have spirit-based practices built into their, fundamental system, how they view the world, it's taught from birth onwards. The capacities that people get, or you could say the spiritual power that people are in contact with through these kinds of practices, shamanistic practices, was often regarded with ambiguity and tremendous respect. But that was on both sides. So it was regarded with respect in the positive and also respect in the negative, in the way that that power could be abused. And ultimately the arbiters of a practitioner was the society itself. And so there were natural checks and balances that kind of kept the practitioner in line with the principles that the society itself was deeming necessary for the existence of these spirit-based practices. In other words, they were there to guide the process. This happened through like reputation and council, community discussion, sort of proof of what a person's character was really about. And what I've noticed, particularly with ayahuasca, is that as the practices have been decontextualized, they've been taken out of the Amazon and brought into other contexts, that the community, the real, land-based, localized version of what a practitioner is changed. And now you have people who are practicing within the context of a very fragmented world. Even though our world is very connected and interconnected, in some ways it's also very fragmented, like that superfluous information everywhere. And use an example of going into the grocery store, because I've been living in Peru for so long. When I go back to the US, it's like there's 2,000 cereal boxes. Yeah. Like there's so much of everything everywhere all the time that it's actually harder it can be more difficult to orient yourself. And so in some ways, the character of the leader of the ayahuasca ceremony, the shaman, the ayahuasquero, doesn't really have that rooted community, or you could say that they don't need it anymore. Mm. And the result of, I think, the intermixing of these different cultures and practices and belief systems and worldviews has been to elevate the character of the maestro in a way that I think makes the reality of what's happening a lot harder to get in contact with. And in other words, it's like people are creating a relationship with an illusion rather than something that is grounded in reality. And, shamans, people who serve medicine, are treated like rock stars. And I don't think that that's what they are. And I don't think that that's what they should be treated as. And I've learned a lot being with my teacher, Maestro Alberto, on his land, with his family, on the ground, just being with him as he's living daily jungle, farm, country life. He's very grounded and he's very humble, and he's among the people. He's not this exalted figure that presents, believes, or even acts as if he is somehow better than any of the people that he's serving medicine to. And I've taken a lot from watching him, because I believe that the grounded expression of the person, the human expression of the maestro, of someone who does have these spiritual capacities, who can evoke these transformative states in other people, needs to be on the ground with them, not placed somehow above them. And that creates these, hierarchical expressions of shamanism that ultimately don't really serve the participants in the space. And so when we work, we just level everything. Mm-hmm. We all come into that space, whether it's your first time tasting ayahuasca or you've had 1,000 ceremonies. We are the same. We are equal in the eyes of the universe, in the eyes of, the great container, God, however you want to put that into language. And we are on that journey together. And that also aligns with the very teachings of the medicine about how to cultivate and develop healthy dynamics in your own life. I've seen things go pretty left of center when the egotistical aspects of the character of the shaman or the maestro or the maestra takes precedent over the connection with the medicine itself. Does that answer the question?
Yes, it definitely does. So I grew up, I would say, foundationally Buddhist, though I never really
Mm.
practiced or worship. But the foundation of Buddhism is really just almost like the foundation of spirituality. And the way I see spirituality is that it's not about worshiping anyone. And it is kind of like what you make of it
Mm.
if you follow your own intuition, have your own kind of spiritual experiences.
Yeah, yeah.
So I often say I'm spiritual, but not religious. For me, I get a little bit hesitant or turned off by any kind of really organized religion where you start worshiping because I really think that humans are humans. I mean, I just think it's really beautiful how your retreats are run and how the maestro, grounds himself and like everyone grounds themselves in the same way, which I think is the foundation of spirituality.
Exactly. And that kind of ties back to what I was saying about it being practical.
Yeah.
And the wisdom within the plants is very, very, very practical.
Yeah.
And the potentiality in taking that to heart and putting it into practice is enormous for change.
And everyone's spiritual practice or awakening is going to be different. Like everyone's journey is going to be different.
Yes.
So, what would your title be? Because there's curandero, am I saying that right?
Yes.
Which is the healer, and then maestro, which is the one of wisdom or a guide.
Yeah.
And I guess you're working as a guide and a facilitator.
Yeah, all of that applies. I kind of look at my role as just being present to help people with the journey. And one of the common terms for that in, the way ayahuasca is worked with nowadays is facilitator, which works. I mean, that fits the definition. I also don't necessarily use that in terms of my identity. Technically, I would be considered an apprentice ayahuasquero. And nowadays, I would be considered an ayahuasquero who's close to finishing training, according to Maestro Alberto. Even though I don't really take the title of apprentice either, that would be the technical way to describe it, an apprentice ayahuasquero. But it's just like you said, this is exactly how Don Alberto describes his role as a guide. He's like, we're there to guide. We're there to guide the ceremony, guide the spirits, guide the states of consciousness to different locations that those states of consciousness need to be in, and in order for the person who's receiving the medicine to receive what it is that they need to do. And it's really nothing more than that. And outside of the ceremony, as he says himself, which I 100% agree with, we're just people just like everybody else. Oh, this is what I wanted to say. Drinking ayahuasca does not mean you're more spiritual than other people. There's a lot of elitism I've seen in the ayahuasca culture,
Gosh,
which I just
yes.
don't agree with at all. Just not at all. I've seen people drink hundreds and hundreds of ceremonies and not actually change. In fact, I've seen the opposite happen. I've seen people become less kind, less open, less loving, more obsessed, more challenged, more angry. It's not like come to the jungle, drink ayahuasca, or go to your local yoga studio where the ceremony is and drink ayahuasca and be changed. The medicine, if anything else, doesn't necessarily heal you directly, but it shows you how to work to achieve your own healing. And that's up to you at the end of the day. Of course, the experience of ayahuasca shifts energy in titanic ways. But if you don't learn how to embody that in a way that is practical and truly aligned with the principles of the medicine, it does not mean that you are going to somehow spiritually evolve.
Right.
And so you could be some great maestro for 245 years and still be a jerk. Like, it does not mean that you are somehow this better, more evolved person. I think that's a really important message for people to understand, that the technical training for an ayahuasquero is very, very difficult to be able to do that. And it does require a person to go through a process of transformation. But everyone out there serving medicine is not necessarily going through that process. They're not necessarily growing personally in a direction that would make them warrant your adoration or anything like that.
It's almost like it'll blast through one part of your ego and then sometimes go the complete other way and grow another part of your ego.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Enhance it. Yes. You're exactly right. It does do that.
I've seen that quite a lot, actually.
And look, if you don't take enough time drinking plant medicine, you can get lost in that world. it is not just anytime, anywhere with anyone. All of these things are really important. Timing, space, context, who you're with, who the person guiding the ceremony is, and where you're at, what the reason you're doing it for. It's not just drink ayahuasca, do a bunch of diets, and just keep doing that forever. Like, you really can get lost in that world. It's like a spiritual purgatory. And I've seen that with people who don't, again, bring it back to something rooted and grounded in 3D practical life. That is where spiritual growth happens.
Yes.
It's in the mundane world.
Yeah, that makes sense actually, because it's like you're taking the ayahuasca, you're in 5D, you're getting the message on how to heal, and then you go back to 3D. But it's like, how are you going to apply those lessons to your life? Because a whole huge part of it is actually doing the work.
That's right.
Otherwise, you're just going to, like you said, just keep drinking it and doing diets and then thinking you're evolved when you're just going a little bit far out and far above.
Yeah, exactly. And the way that happens typically, again, like how plants grow, is through time. And so you have to give it enough time. And that's what people call integration. And integration takes time. And what takes place in the ceremonies can be very fast, hyperspeed, warp speed, no time. And it can seem like, okay, everything that happens there is done and it's done and that's it. And then you don't have to do anything. But it's actually the opposite. It's like, that's the blueprint. Now you have to go walk yourself through it. And that can take months, but really years. And the plant medicine path as a path of change is very effective. And it's most effective when it's done with patience and conscientiousness and slowly.
Yeah.
It's not a race.
I think the frustration lies in like the speed of 5D. And then you go back to 3D, which is so slow.
Yeah.
I mean, I see ayahuasca as another tool.
Right.
It's not for everyone.
Totally not.
It is another tool, just like meditation, just like breath work.
That's true.
And I guess it just depends on time in your life.
Yep.
About when it's appropriate.
Right. I mean, I also don't think ayahuasca itself should be held on some pedestal above all of these other things where people kind of get into this space of worshiping it. And I mean, look, I have a long-term loving relationship with ayahuasca. And that's the very reason that I can say this and know it. Not only is ayahuasca not for everyone, but it may not be the best tool for something that somebody's looking to actually do. It's not just a panacea. It's not drink ayahuasca and everything is healed. There's tremendous efficacy and capacity in the plant to help with a lot of different things. And some things it is really, really good at. Other things, somebody might be better off with a different modality. And some people, it's just not the right medicine as well.
You're talking about having a lot of important factors of what affects your ayahuasca journey. And I wanted to actually talk about the psychic energy and how important that is from when you're taking the medicine. You know, like your environment, your set and setting. If you can give me a little bit of information about that.
Sure. It's like a landscape. You know, I sometimes relate to ayahuasca as a place rather than a experience. It's a realm, and it's a sensorial realm, and it's a realm where things that are not typically perceived can become perceived. And this includes things within yourself, things around you, things in the physical world, things that are in the physical world but you don't normally see, as well as the energies and things that are within other people. It opens energetic gateways, and sort of the combination of that opening, or those different kinds of openings, and the physical space that you're in, and like the collective energies that a group of people are all bringing, are part of that landscape. And so in some ways, every possible variable that could be part of the experience that you're about to have with the medicine has some kind of effect on the way that that space is going to develop once the ceremony and the encounter with ayahuasca begins. So one of the roles of the maestros and the practitioners is to set and clear and also create a space that is designed to serve the people. In our work, there's one single intention every single time, and that is medicine. And medicine is, at its essence, you could say anything that is going to evoke or create positive change or transformation. Anything that is going to help alleviate suffering. That's really the essence of what a medicine is. And that's universal. That's not just ayahuasca. I would say that medicine is there to treat suffering, to help alleviate suffering. And so the container that we create, which is primarily a psychic container, but it includes the physical space, which in this view would always be part of the psychic container. In other words, we're in that soup, we're in that ocean all the time anyway. And so in there, it's created and it's designed to support that intention. So energies, entities, psychic residue that doesn't support that intention or doesn't align with that intention will either be prevented from coming in or cleansed out as the process evolves. And a lot of times it also includes what people are releasing and what people are bringing into that space. But it's really important to find the baseline of neutrality and a really clean intention for serving the medicine to people that is based on healing and helping the process of other people alleviating their suffering. Because if you don't have that, or you have other intentions, even if they're unconscious, then that can invite or allow or attract other kinds of energies that don't necessarily represent that one single clear intent. And so a lot of the learning of how to do this is learning how to hold that single intent for yourself and others, and how to keep things out and invite other things into that container. There's a lot of different ways that we would build that architecture, but the foundational principle is just as I've said in our work.
I mean, that must be quite intense for you, I would imagine, to hold space for everyone, especially being clairaudient and clairvoyant. I mean, how do you manage
Yeah.
that? You're just like swatting away entities and energies. You're like, nope, get out. Nope, you're not. Oh, you can stay.
Sometimes it is like that. Yes, sometimes it is. But what I've learned is to really root in the plants as the primary resource and energetic imprint that is doing the work. So in some ways I remove myself
Interesting.
so that I don't actually have to get involved as a person. And it's taken me a long time to figure that out. And I've worked with many other practitioners, not just in ayahuasca either, who their person is much more involved. And I don't, that is also effective. But in my work, in order to maintain my own sanity and level of energy and ability to kind of keep myself as healthy as I can and straight and as clear as I can, I try to not let Matt, the person, get too involved. It doesn't mean that I'm not there with people. I am, but I'm using the open channels to the plants that I've dieted, to the plants that I've built these relationships with, and with the medicines that they have shown me how to use to actually, in a manner of speaking, do the heavy lifting and to really get in there with people. And a lot of that comes from learning who and what the spirits are and what they can do and how to guide them to guide you to guide them to perform those kinds of tasks. Without the plants and that work, specifically when you're working with plants, it's virtually impossible to be able to hold the space in the way that I know it without those real solid relationships. And it's become one of the primary relationships in my life, which is very interesting. But it's, this somewhat imaginal, psychic, etheric, but also very much embodied relationship with plants and plant spirits. And, so in a way, what they're doing is they're helping you to create a structure so that they can hold and create that space and do what they're designed to do, which is heal. and teach wisdom and help people become more oriented towards a truth that ultimately makes their lives better.
Oh, that's really interesting. So it is like teamwork with the plant spirit and having trust with the
Yes.
plant
Yes.
to hold space so you don't put all your energy into filtering.
That's right.
Even if it's two or three people, like how do you even manage that? Because that's a lot of stuff you're opening up.
Yep. It's a lot. Just a single person is a universe. I mean, the amassed experience of one psyche is
Yeah.
astronomical.
Yeah.
It's impossible to even account one, including your own, one single life.
And it's their journey too, right? So you also don't want to interfere too much
Exactly.
with their journey. It's like, well, they need to also handle it
That's right.
to a certain extent.
That's right. Yes. No, that's totally on point. It's good to know how to get involved as a practitioner. You need those skills, but as a mode of operating, there's a lot of drawbacks to doing it that way. And so really teaming up with the plants is the primary method that I've been taught through example from Maestro Alberto.
DJing has provided me with a channel for creativity as well as another form of meditation. Be sure to listen to one of my cosmically curated DJ sets coming up shortly. Do you have also, I mean, you have your own spirit guides, of course, but do you also have other spirit guides specifically that come to help you that are not from the plants? Or is it almost like the plant spirit guides coming to you?
Oh, that's a really good question. Interesting. Yeah. I have one primary one that I met years ago, early on in, like, not long after I first kind of expanded into that psychedelic spiritual awakening. When I met this guy, though, it was not via altered state using a plant or any other sacred substance. It was, in my kind of ceremonial meditation. But I met that one early on.
That's awesome. So you're able to get into those altered states through meditation then? The same level as like if you take psychedelics?
I mean, nowadays, yes. I mean, what's true for me now is that the state of that I go into with ayahuasca has become normal. It's become comfortable. It's become something that I'm used to and that I feel pretty good in. I'm very familiar with that world. And so I don't even necessarily find that I shift very much even when I go into ayahuasca. It's almost like the reverse has happened, is where the altered state has kind of been built into how my mind works on a day-to-day basis. But it's very grounded. It's not like I'm flying off into 5D. I mean, my life is pretty boring outside. I mean, maybe not so boring, but it's typical, I would say. But the process of connecting with the plants and kind of slipping into a state of consciousness where that connection and communication is easier can be done without having to ingest anything. But early on, like before I even drank ayahuasca, I would kind of work myself up into these trances. It would take time, a couple hours of like really trying to go deep into that. And all of that still has a lot of value.
I've been wanting to kind of train myself to get into that state, but it's taking a long time. I'm just being patient because I know a lot of monks that dedicate their lives to meditation can get there with or without psychedelic use.
Yeah. I mean, I do consider that the fundamental principle that's being worked with is the root of our consciousness. It's the altered states that are induced by these methods and by these sacred plants and sacred substances can help expand that process, and they can sort of help you get into these profound states of consciousness quicker, but that doesn't necessarily mean better. I still feel, even when I go into ayahuasca, that the foundational element of all of this is the mystery of human consciousness itself.
Join us next week for part 2 of the interview with Matt Toussaint. You can get in touch with Matt by visiting casadelmaistromedicina.com, which is linked in the show notes. See you next week. Be sure to connect with me by hitting subscribe on whatever platform you're listening on. I greatly appreciate your support and would be thrilled if you could leave a review. Your reviews help this podcast reach a wider audience and foster a stronger collective connection. You can also connect with me on Instagram and YouTube at the Cosmic Whispers Podcast. Thanks for listening.
dreams that you had you could you do you would 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 you want you could do so you do you would you could you do you would you could you do you would you could you do you would you want you could do so you do you could you want him to do you so much you could do anything.
If you like what you hear and would like to check out the full set, be sure to find me, Cosmic Mama, on SoundCloud. That's soundcloud.com/Cosmic Mama.